The galaxy had long ago convinced itself that some cries deserved to fade into silence. Across 10,000 star systems, civilization spoke proudly of progress, honor, and order, yet hidden beneath those polished ideals was an ancient law so cold that no one questioned it anymore. The weak were abandoned. The broken were forgotten. The young who failed impossible trials were simply erased from history, their names never spoken again. It was considered mercy by some, necessity by others. No one dared challenge the tradition because every empire feared the same thing, that compassion would make them vulnerable. And so, in the endless darkness between the stars, countless worlds learned to ignore the sound of children calling for help. Over generations, entire species trained themselves not to listen. They silenced guilt with ceremony. They buried shame beneath laws older than memory. Eventually, they stopped hearing the cries altogether. But on the edge of explored space, where ancient navigation beacons flickered like dying stars and forgotten battlefields drifted through eternal night, something refused to disappear. Deep beneath the frozen crust of a shattered moon, hidden under kilometers of fractured ice and twisted metallic ruins, faint signals pulsed through the darkness. At first they seemed like random interference, tiny bursts of static swallowed by cosmic radiation. Automated satellites dismissed them. Merchant vessels flew past without slowing. Even military patrols ignored the readings, assuming they were echoes from the catastrophic war that had destroyed the moon centuries before. Yet the signals continued. Weak. Uneven. Fragile. Like tiny heartbeats stubbornly refusing to surrender. Inside those frozen caverns, where pale blue crystals reflected ghostly light across walls scarred by forgotten explosions, 6 small figures huddled together against impossible cold. Every breath escaped in trembling clouds that instantly crystallized in the freezing air. Their once golden fur was coated with frost, their tiny bodies shaking from exhaustion and hunger. They had no fire. No shelter beyond broken stone. No parents waiting to return. Their supplies had vanished days earlier, and instinct had become their only guide. The oldest cub, barely old enough to understand fear, wrapped trembling arms around the younger ones, trying to shield them from the biting wind that screamed through the tunnels like invisible predators. Their eyes remained fixed on the darkness beyond the cave entrance, searching for silhouettes that never appeared. Every distant echo sounded like hope. Every passing hour stole a little more of it. They had been left there deliberately. Not because their parents had stopped loving them. Because their people believed survival itself was a test, and failure deserved no second chance. Far above the frozen wasteland, the stars burned with silent indifference. Entire fleets crossed nearby hyperspace corridors without ever realizing that 6 innocent lives hung by the thinnest thread imaginable. To the galaxy, those cubs were already dead. Their fate had been recorded before their hearts had even stopped beating. No rescue mission would ever be launched. No memorial would ever be built. History had already erased them. But history had made one mistake. It assumed every civilization obeyed the same rules. Somewhere beyond the endless darkness, beyond the forgotten frontiers and abandoned sectors where maps dissolved into uncertainty, a human exploration vessel was quietly changing course after detecting a signal everyone else had ignored. Because there was one species the galaxy had never truly understood. Humans had many flaws. They argued. They made mistakes. They rushed into impossible situations with reckless optimism. But there was one thing they had never learned to do. They never walked away from abandoned children. Captain Elena Hayes had spent nearly 20 years exploring the forgotten edges of known space, and experience had taught her one simple truth: the galaxy hid its greatest secrets where everyone else had stopped looking. Her ship, the Horizon, wasn't a battleship or a luxury cruiser. It was an exploration vessel built for endurance rather than glory, its reinforced hull scarred by countless meteor impacts and atmospheric descents into worlds no civilization had mapped in centuries. Inside its panoramic bridge, holographic star charts shimmered across the dim command deck, revealing vast regions marked only by empty black grids and faded warning symbols. Beyond the forward viewport stretched a graveyard of dead planets, drifting asteroid fields, and shattered moons that looked like broken bones scattered across the void. Most captains avoided this sector. Elena had chosen it precisely because of that. Somewhere beyond the silence, she believed, every forgotten place still had a story waiting to be uncovered. The moon hanging before them was little more than a fractured sphere wrapped in endless winter. Ancient orbital bombardments had split its crust thousands of years ago, leaving glowing fault lines that pulsed faintly beneath sheets of ice several kilometers thick. Frozen debris from a civilization long erased littered the surface, collapsed towers protruding from glaciers, rusted war machines half buried beneath snow, and enormous impact craters stretching beyond the horizon like open wounds. Ghostly auroras rippled through the thin atmosphere, painting the landscape in shifting shades of blue and violet. The entire world felt abandoned by time itself. "Captain," Lieutenant Marcus Chen called quietly from the sensor station. "I'm picking up something, extremely faint." Elena walked toward the display, her boots echoing softly across the metallic deck. The screen showed weak bursts of energy flickering beneath the ice. At first glance they resembled geological activity, but the intervals were strangely regular. "Run it again." Marcus adjusted the filters. Static disappeared. The signal remained. Not random. Rhythmic. Almost biological. Another officer leaned over the console. "Life signs?" "No," Marcus answered uncertainly. "Too weak. They're fluctuating." Elena narrowed her eyes. Frontier regulations were clear. Exploration crews weren't expected to risk lives investigating unstable ruins with unreliable readings. The moon had already been classified centuries earlier as lifeless. Every database agreed. Every survey supported the conclusion. Yet something about those tiny pulses refused to fit the data. She had learned long ago that instruments measured probability. Instinct measured possibility. "Prepare a surface team." The bridge fell silent. Her executive officer looked up immediately. "Captain, we're talking about descending into an unstable bombardment zone. Those caverns could collapse without warning." "I know. The mission isn't authorized." "I know. There could be nothing down there." Elena stared through the bridge windows toward the frozen world below. Somewhere beneath those endless sheets of ice, something, or someone, had managed to survive against impossible odds. The signal wasn't loud enough to demand attention. It was just desperate enough to deserve it. "We've crossed half the galaxy looking for signs that life can endure impossible conditions," she said quietly. "If something is still alive down there, then our mission just found its purpose." Minutes later, armored shuttles descended through swirling clouds of frozen dust. Their engines cast rivers of orange light across the endless white landscape as violent winds battered the hulls. Ice crystals slammed against reinforced windows like shards of glass. The temperature outside plunged so low that exposed metal became brittle within seconds. The rescue team entered a massive fissure leading beneath the moon's surface. Darkness swallowed them almost instantly. Only helmet lamps pierced the endless black, revealing towering crystal formations that shimmered like frozen stars trapped inside stone. Every footstep echoed through the caverns. Every distant creak sounded like the moon itself breathing beneath their feet. Then the motion tracker chirped. Once. Twice. 6 separate contacts. Small. Clustered tightly together. Alive. Elena felt her heartbeat quicken. Whatever they were about to find had survived in a place where survival should have been impossible. And somehow, she already knew this mission was about to change far more than a single forgotten moon. The moment the horizon transmitted confirmation that the 6 cubs were alive, the silence across interstellar communication channels lasted exactly 12 seconds. Then the reply arrived. Not a message of relief. Not gratitude. Not even disbelief. It was a command. Cold. Absolute. Unmistakable. The emblem of the Varkari High Council materialized across the bridge's main display, a silver claw wrapped around a dying star. The ancient alien officials stared forward with emotionless eyes, their expressions carved from centuries of unquestioned tradition. Their eldest counselor spoke without hesitation, his deep voice echoing through the command deck like the sound of a closing tomb. Those offspring have already failed the trial of ice. Their fate was decided before your arrival. You will leave them where they belong, or return them immediately for ceremonial judgment. Every member of the Horizon's bridge crew stood frozen. Elena Hayes felt a chill that had nothing to do with the frozen moon beneath them. In all her years among the stars, she had witnessed ruthless governments, brutal warlords, and civilizations hardened by endless conflict. But never had she heard a species calmly demand the death of its own children. The transmission continued as though discussing damaged equipment instead of living beings. According to Varkari law, the weak existed only to burden the strong. Cubs unable to survive isolation before maturity were considered genetically unworthy of inheritance. Rescue was forbidden. Compassion was corruption. Survival alone proved value. The counselors spoke with perfect certainty, reciting traditions that had governed their empire for over 4,000 years. There was no anger in their voices. No cruelty. That somehow made it even worse. They genuinely believed they were protecting the future of their civilization. Around the bridge, human officers exchanged horrified glances. Lieutenant Marcus Chen quietly removed his headset, unable to hide the disgust on his face. Dr. Amara Singh clenched her fists so tightly her knuckles turned white. "They're children," she whispered under her breath. "They don't even understand what's happening." Below the surface, inside the Horizon's medical bay, those same children huddled together beneath thermal blankets, still flinching whenever the automatic doors opened. Every sudden movement made them recoil instinctively, expecting punishment instead of kindness. Human doctors worked carefully around them, repairing fractured bones with microscopic surgical drones and reversing severe malnutrition through accelerated cellular therapy. Warm light replaced the endless darkness they had known for weeks. Fresh air carried the scent of sterilized medicine instead of frozen dust. Soft voices replaced the terrifying silence of abandonment. Yet the deepest wounds couldn't be scanned by medical instruments. The oldest cub refused to eat until every younger sibling received food first. Another refused to sleep, forcing exhausted eyes to remain open as if believing danger would return the moment they relaxed. Survival had become their only language. Captain Elena watched from behind the observation glass, her reflection faint against the bright medical ward. She had rescued civilians from pirate attacks. She had evacuated colonies before supernovas consumed them. But this felt different. These children weren't victims of war or disaster. They had been discarded by the people who were supposed to protect them. She couldn't force herself to imagine leaving them behind simply because tradition demanded it. The thought alone made her stomach tighten. Some laws, she realized, survived only because nobody had ever dared to say no. The answer from Earth arrived hours later. It contained only one sentence. Protect the children. We'll handle the consequences, ****. The Horizon immediately altered course for human territory. Behind them, the Varkari Council declared humanity guilty of violating sacred law. Across their empire, military shipyards awakened from decades of peace. Massive war fleets powered ancient fusion reactors. Weapons platforms came online one after another. Admirals prepared invasion strategies, convinced they were defending the purity of their civilization against dangerous foreign ideals. They believed humans had stolen 6 weak cubs. What they failed to understand was that humanity had just adopted them. 7 years passed, and the galaxy quietly prepared for a war it believed would end in humanity's defeat. The Varkari Empire expanded its fleets along the frontier, convinced that Earth would eventually surrender the rescued cubs to avoid annihilation. Human diplomats stalled for time, refusing every demand while revealing almost nothing about the children's fate. To the outside world, the 6 abandoned cubs had simply disappeared into human space. Rumors spread across interstellar networks. Some claimed the humans had hidden them on a secret military world. Others insisted they had become scientific experiments or symbols of political resistance. No one knew the truth. The truth was far more extraordinary. Behind the walls of secure academies and peaceful mountain settlements on Earth, the cubs had grown up not as prisoners or weapons, but as members of families. They celebrated birthdays they never would have had. They laughed. They argued. They learned history, mathematics, engineering, music, and languages alongside human children who never cared that they had been born under a different sun. For the first time in their lives, they discovered that strength could be measured by more than survival. Then the Valkyrie Armada finally crossed the border. Thousands of warships emerged from hyperspace like a storm swallowing the stars, their dark hull stretching across entire sectors of space. Civil defense sirens echoed throughout Earth's orbital stations as fleets scrambled into defensive formation. Every military analyst expected the 6 rescued cubs to remain safely hidden behind planetary shields. Instead, 6 sleek vessels detached from Earth's main defense fleet and accelerated directly toward the approaching armada. Their engines burned with brilliant blue plasma, cutting through the darkness with impossible confidence. When communication channels opened, the Valkyrie commanders stared in stunned silence. Standing on the bridges of those ships were the very cubs they had condemned to die. Only they were cubs no longer. Each now towered over even the largest Valkyrie warriors, wearing adaptive combat armor forged from human alloys and Valkyrie metallurgy. Their movements carried the discipline of elite soldiers, but their eyes revealed something entirely unfamiliar to their birth species. Compassion. One by one, they introduced themselves. Not with military ranks. With names. My name is Kale Hayes. My name is Sora Chen. My name is Rin Alvarez. Each carried a human family name alongside the one given at birth. The simple act sent waves of confusion through the enemy fleet. Before anyone could respond, Kale transmitted something else. An encrypted archive recovered during years of genetic research conducted jointly by human and Valkyrie scientists who had secretly questioned the Empire's traditions. Ancient genomic records unfolded across every command display in the Armada. Hidden beneath thousands of years of manipulated history was evidence the Empire had erased long ago. The trial of ice had never strengthened the Valkyrie species. It had crippled it. The abandoned cubs carried an extremely rare adaptive neural architecture, genetic pathways that allowed extraordinary creativity, emotional intelligence, strategic improvisation, and accelerated learning under changing conditions. In ancient times, these individuals had led exploration fleets, solved impossible engineering problems, and prevented civil wars through innovative thinking. But because they developed more slowly as children, early rulers had mistaken patience for weakness. Over centuries, tradition hardened into law. Generation after generation, every child possessing those remarkable traits had been abandoned before reaching maturity. The Empire hadn't been removing weakness. It had been systematically exterminating its own greatest potential. Silence spread through the Valkyrie fleet. Veteran commanders stared at the data in disbelief. Historians recognized forgotten genetic signatures buried in restricted archives. Even the High Council's own medical officers could no longer deny the evidence. The 6 children left to freeze beneath a dead moon were never evolutionary failures. They were the future their civilization had spent millennia destroying. And the greatest irony of all. Only humanity had given that future the chance to grow strong enough to reveal the truth. For one impossible moment, the battlefield became completely still. Thousands of warships drifted in silent formation, their weapon arrays fully charged, their targeting systems locked, yet no one fired. Across the command decks of the Valkyrie Armada, officers stared at the genetic evidence unfolding before them while the 6 warriors they had once condemned stood fearlessly between Earth and the greatest military force the Empire had ever assembled. But silence could not erase centuries of pride. Deep within the flagship Iron Dominion, Supreme War Marshal Korvac slammed his armored fist against the command rail, his voice echoing through every military frequency. "Lies," he roared. "Human deception. Purge them all." In an instant, the fragile pause shattered. Crimson lances of plasma erupted across the darkness, tearing through space like burning rivers. The war had begun. Earth's defense fleet answered immediately. But humanity did not fight the way the galaxy expected. There were no rigid battle lines. No predictable formations. Instead, hundreds of independent squadrons scattered in every direction, turning apparent chaos into deliberate strategy. Civilian cargo haulers released thousands of autonomous drones disguised as debris fields. Mining vessels redirected tractor beams to pull entire asteroids into carefully calculated collision paths. Research stations overloaded experimental gravity generators, bending local space just enough to throw enemy targeting computers into complete confusion. Every scientist, engineer, medic, and civilian volunteer became part of the defense. Humanity had never separated survival from cooperation. Every profession mattered when home was threatened. At the center of the storm flew the 6 rescued Valkyrie. Kale's command ship plunged directly through the enemy formation, broadcasting orders with calm precision. Sora anticipated fleet movement seconds before they occurred, guiding human interceptors through impossibly narrow attack corridors. Rin coordinated rescue operations even while missiles streaked past his hull, refusing to leave damaged ships behind. The others fought with the same impossible balance of discipline and mercy, proving that compassion had never weakened them, it had sharpened every instinct they possessed. They had inherited the strength of their birth species, but humanity had taught them something far greater. Never abandon those who fight beside you. The battle intensified. Explosions illuminated the void brighter than newborn suns. Destroyed cruisers spun silently into darkness, their shattered hulls reflecting flashes of blue and crimson energy. Emergency broadcasts filled every frequency. Rescue shuttles darted fearlessly through collapsing debris fields, pulling survivors from ships moments before reactors detonated. Human medics treated wounded Valkyrie prisoners alongside their own soldiers without hesitation, an act so unthinkable that many enemy warriors simply lowered their weapons in stunned disbelief. Marshal Korvac refused to retreat. He ordered one final assault aimed directly at Earth. His flagship accelerated toward the planet, its planet cracker cannon charging with enough energy to erase entire continents. Kale intercepted him alone. The 2 massive vessels collided in orbit above Earth, their shields collapsing in a cascade of blinding light. Boarding teams stormed through ruptured corridors as alarms screamed through burning compartments. Face to face at last, Korvac towered over Kale, convinced that brute strength would decide the future. "You were born to die," the Marshal growled. Kale met his gaze without fear. "No," he answered quietly. "I was born to be saved." The duel lasted only minutes. When it ended, Korvac lay defeated, not executed, but disarmed. Kale stepped back instead of delivering the final blow. That single act echoed louder than every weapon fired throughout the battle. Watching from thousands of ships, Valkyrie commanders saw the impossible unfold before their eyes. The warrior who had every reason to seek revenge had instead chosen restraint. The children they had abandoned had become stronger than the civilization that abandoned them, not because humans had taught them how to kill, but because humans had taught them when not to. One by one, across the battlefield, enemy weapons powered down. Entire fleets surrendered. Not because they had been overwhelmed by superior firepower, but because they had finally witnessed a form of strength their empire had forgotten centuries ago. Humanity hadn't won by proving compassion was weakness overcome by force. Humanity had won by proving compassion was the greatest force of all. The war ended not with the roar of another weapon, but with the quiet sound of old beliefs breaking apart. Across the galaxy, news of the Battle of Sol spread faster than any fleet could travel. Every transmission carried the same impossible images: Varkari warships lowering their weapons, human rescue vessels pulling wounded enemies from burning wreckage, and 6 warriors, once abandoned as worthless cubs, standing together beside the people who had given them a future. The Varkari Empire, which had remained unchanged for thousands of years, faced a reckoning unlike anything in its history. The ancient trial of ice was abolished within a single generation. Frozen moons that had once served as execution grounds became memorial worlds, where silence was no longer a symbol of strength but a reminder of lives that should never have been lost. Families who had buried their grief beneath tradition finally spoke openly of the children they had been forced to leave behind. Across countless settlements, tears replaced ceremonies. Regret replaced pride. It was a painful awakening, but for the first time in centuries, an empire chose healing over fear. On Earth, life slowly returned to something resembling peace. Orbital shipyards that had produced warships began constructing exploration vessels once again. Military factories transformed into research centers where humans and Varkari engineers worked side by side, combining technologies that neither civilization could have created alone. Schools welcomed students from dozens of species, their classrooms filled with voices speaking different languages but sharing the same dreams. In parks beneath blue skies, young Varkari children chased human friends through fields of green grass, laughing without ever knowing the terror their parents had once accepted as destiny. No child was tested by abandonment anymore. No family was forced to choose between love and tradition. To many humans, these scenes felt ordinary. To the Varkari, they were nothing short of miraculous. At the center of New Geneva stood a monument unlike any other. It wasn't a towering statue of soldiers or a monument celebrating military victory. Instead, carved from white stone and polished titanium, 6 small figures stood hand in hand beneath an open arch reaching toward the stars. Around its base were engraved the names of every child, from every known species, who had been abandoned under ancient customs throughout galactic history. Visitors often arrived expecting to read about the Great Battle of Sol. Instead, they found a single inscription that stopped them in their tracks. The greatest victory was the rescue that made the battle unnecessary. Captain Elena Hayes visited the memorial every year. She never came wearing her old uniform. She came as a mother. The 6 Varkari she had once discovered trembling beneath frozen ice now towered over her, each following different paths through life. Kale had become an ambassador devoted to rebuilding trust between civilizations. Sora led deep space exploration missions beyond the edge of known space, searching not for enemies but for new friends. Rin founded interstellar rescue organizations dedicated to answering distress calls others ignored. The others became scientists, teachers, and guardians, carrying humanity's greatest lesson wherever they traveled. Every one of them still remembered the frozen darkness of that shattered moon. But they no longer remembered it with fear. They remembered it as the place where their first life ended. And their real one began. As the sun dipped below Earth's horizon, golden light washed across the memorial, casting long shadows that merged into one. Children from dozens of worlds ran laughing through the surrounding gardens, unaware that their freedom had been purchased not by conquest, but by compassion. Elena watched them for a long moment before looking upward, where countless stars slowly appeared against the evening sky. Somewhere among those distant lights were still forgotten worlds, unanswered signals, and lonely voices waiting for someone to care enough to listen. History would remember the war. Strategists would study the battle. Scientists would celebrate the discoveries. But none of those would explain why the galaxy had truly changed. It changed because, on one frozen moon, when every law, every tradition, and every powerful empire insisted that 6 frightened cubs should be left to die, humanity stopped, opened the door, and said the 3 words that echoed across the stars forever. Come home, kids.